So here's another stop motion test. This time I used the Stickybones puppet along with the Stickybones rig, and I was pretty pleased with the results. I was definitely kind of winging it here, but the good old run cycle formula, since I know that so well, having done so many runs over the years, this one was a little bit easier for me to pull off. I think the big issues, of course, again, are things that I should have controlled ahead of time. If you have a look at the background, what I did is I taped some newsprint just over the wall just to kind of get rid of the horrible just bland white, just to give a little bit more contrast around the figure. And this area unfortunately is popping around like crazy, and especially over here, right in here, there's going to be this big shadow. So that means it's going to be some pretty tight masking that needs to be done around the figure to isolate it. The other thing you can see what I was using was two magnetic plates here to try and keep the figure supported. The poses like this, ideally, what we want to avoid is when the rig over here, this rig back here, gets in front of the figure. So this isn't too bad, but you can see that there's a lot of low contrast around that edge, and it would be really nice if it was easier to isolate. So that's okay, but over in this part, I had to move the rig out of the way to avoid this rig coming in front of this, the left leg over here. So that introduced a little bit of a hiccup because I'd already taped down this spot over here. And so I just grabbed another metal plate and just moved it over here and slid the rig over there so I could click onto it just to dodge that. So again, thinking about how you're going to support the figure and making sure that you understand where you're going to put things, and of course the lighting. I think the biggest issue trying to put this back together and remove everything is going to be the lights and the shadows. So you can really clearly see there's a reflection and a shadow in here on the metal surface, but not the metal surface, but the table itself. But if I go and remove things, then what's going to remain here? So I'm torn between what's easier, to just completely mask out the figure and replace it with a clean background plate, and then go in having looked at the footage and then try to make my own shadows. So this is where I would lean on the expertise of my visual effects colleagues and see what's the better way to go. Completely mask out the figure and do a digital replacement of the shadows, or just try and cut and paste from other frames and try and find stuff that's going to work. So like this area here might provide a pretty good idea in terms of how the shadow's going to work. And I'm even up in the air here. You can see most of the shadow from the figure. It's kind of occluded by this. It's more the rig than the figure, so you might be able to get away with that. But again, at this height, there's not a lot of reflection or shadow from the figure. It's mostly from the rig. But as you get close to the surface, then there's the interplay of light and shadow with all these different things. So just removing the rig plus the stand is going to introduce a lot of weird seams and edges along the pixels to trying to get that to work. So it might simply be easier just completely to replace the background, just isolate the figure, and then have to worry about, well, how do I project in the shadows? So that'll be next. Here you can see this is a work in progress, just sort of a garbage mat of the run cycle. And you can see, as I mentioned, some of the issues that are happening here. So I just went into After Effects and just drew a very simple mask around the figure. And it's not perfect by any means. And you can see along the edges, you can still see parts of the rig that need to be isolated. So I have to go in here and really mask out those edges properly, as well as having to think about what's going to be done with the background here with this sort of odd stuff going on. And then you can see those weird edges, right, where there's clearly a border between the background plate and then the live action, not the live action, the stop motion shoot, and how the shadows were being affected by that rig and other things that were in the background that need to be removed. So it's going to be interesting to see how this turns out. If I just focus on the animation, I'm still relatively pleased. When you're looking at the playback here, it's because it's looping that it kind of halts at the end there. In the other clip, I had 3 copies of it looped so that you could see the animation a little more clearly. So I think when I look at the animation, maybe the noisiest part could be the head. I think just looking at the path of the head, it kind of travels out and then forward right there. So it kind of just jumps out right there. Looking at where the head is here, there, and then here. So it's a bit of a pop forward as we go back, and then again, big jump over here. So this test I did at 12 frames per second. So it's playing on ones, but at 12, it really behaves like a 2D test done at 12 frames per second. So it's moving pretty well, but with the run cycle, it does feel a bit choppy. If I were to go back, I would try and do this on, instead of 12 frames per second, do it at 24 and record everything on ones and see if there's any way I could recreate some blur frames. Again, one thing that's neat about stop motion is you could try to go in here and find these moments where the arms maybe streak past or the legs streak past, and you could try to get some clay that's about the same color as the puppet and try to do your own blur, or if it's a little bit easier, go into Photoshop and make your own little digital blur and see how that behaves, just to add a little bit of life to it. So again, I'll talk to my visual effects colleagues on that one. But on the whole, animation turned out not too shabby for my first time doing a stop motion run cycle. Again, that formula is extremely useful. That's why I really encourage the students to learn the formula. You can always adapt it. You can always fall back on it. And it's just mostly learning how to work around some of the constrictions and restrictions with stop motion, and how that affects your background plate, and how you're going to take this forward to try and remove all the support structures, and also how it affects the lighting setup and what you can do ahead of time to try and mitigate that.